Action Day series. I'm so glad you're joining us for our final session with Adrienne Longenecker and Michael Nilsen, who are with AFP Global. We're so lucky to have them here today with us to talk about national legislative initiatives, policies, regulations, and programs that affect our industry. I'm Catherine Urban. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for our Austin AFP chapter here in town. And I'm also the Director of Development and Communications for St. Andrew's Episcopal School. And I'm thrilled. We've had a 5 series sessions where we've just really been able to dig deep into issues that affect our industry, ways we can support our donors and constituents. And we just finished session 4 where we talked specifically about the 87th legislative session in Texas and things that we need to be watching out for as advocates of our nonprofit, our mission, and our donors and constituents. And now we will take a more global picture with Adrienne and Michael. So I will introduce them formally and then we will get started. So thank you again for being here. Adrienne is CFRE Executive Director for the Colorado River Alliance and an AFP Global Board member, serving as Vice Chair of External Relations, the division which oversees the U.S. Government Relations Committee, the AFP U.S. Political Action Committee Board of Directors, and the Marketing and Communications Committee. With the Colorado River Alliance, she drives the organization's strategic growth, partnership development, and oversees the talented and dedicated staff team. Prior to her role at the River Alliance, Adrienne worked as the COO with Hill Country Conservancy, where she was responsible for the strategic direction of all operational areas, including finance and budgeting, HR, educational programs, volunteerism, communications, marketing, and resource development, and helped lead the design of the first strategic plan for the organization. She's a passionate community servant, well known for her vision, creativity, and consensus building. And she's also the treasurer on the board of directors for Austin Outside, a group that champions outdoor places for all throughout Greater Austin. She attended the University of Texas at Austin, receiving a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, enjoys yoga and taking long walks with her son and her 2 dogs. We also have Michael Nilsen joining us. He has been with AFP for more than 2 decades, and he oversees all communication efforts for the association, working in everything from government affairs and public policy to media relations, marketing, awards, and social media. He was the first full-time lobbyist for the association, advocating in Congress, the Canadian Parliament, and various state and provincial legislatures across North America on public policy issues related to fundraising and the charitable sector. Mr. Nilsen has now returned to AFP's Public Policy Department, working to enhance the association's advocacy and lobbying programs. He's also creating new outreach grassroots initiatives to encourage AFP members and nonprofits around the world to become more engaged in government relations. We are so fortunate to have you both here with us today, and I will turn it over to you to get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. I felt myself blushing a little while my bio was being read because, like many of you all, the attendees, I just consider myself a hardworking AFP member who's passionate about my community and wants to make sure, to the best of my abilities, that everybody gets to enjoy the quality of life that I was so privileged to enjoy. Thank you, Catherine, for your leadership of this 2-day session. I really appreciate you.
Same.
Yeah, and y'all know that Catherine, she's got an event this weekend. So what she's doing right now, she's doing as a volunteer on top of all of the important fundraising work that she's got on her mind today. So let's see here. Hopefully I'm unmuted now. I'm going to kick things off by sharing my screen so that you all can see the presentation. I hope that everybody's doing well. I just put in the chat, how's everybody doing? I'd love to hear from you all. Just generally how you're feeling. I know this has been a multiple day session. We're the last session. So Michael and I are going to bring the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement. And I am personally passionate about this program, so I have a lot of excitement. In addition to currently serving AFP Global, I previously served the AFP chapter. My first role for the AFP chapter was as the Legislative Affairs Chair. And thanks to the great work of many other very smart women like Erica Eckwurzel and Sally Blue and Angela Osborne, we we started the first legislative action day in Texas. And that was, I think, more than a decade ago now. So I appreciate Catherine, appreciate Kristen as the AFP board chair for continuing AFP Austin's commitment to engaging professional fundraisers into advocacy and public policy. I know because you're here today that you understand or believe in the importance of our voice in advocacy and public policy. I'm glad you're here, Kelly, and I'm glad that you're doing well. And hi, Kristen. I got lots of enthusiasm for you this morning and energy, and I will be sure to share that. In fact, right now, if everybody would indulge me, I'm going to invite you all to just take a moment to sit in your chair as upright as you can and just take a nice, long, deep breath with me as we get started together in this moment. It's tough work being a fundraiser. So taking a moment to just breathe and relax and connect with yourself is really, really important to me. I want you to know how much your voice means, how important your voice is in advocacy and public policy. I was inspired by a quote this morning as I was getting ready and wanted to share that quote with you all right now. AFP Global, and that's what we're going to talk about first. I just want to share with you all a little bit more about everything that AFP Global is doing to help connect fundraisers with advocacy and public policy. And then Michael Nilsen is going to deep dive into the policy. We've just come off of Virtual Lobby Week, which was the national initiative to connect AFP members and chapters across the entire nation with their elected officials at the federal level. It was wildly successful. And we had very specific positions and issues that we were talking with our elected officials about. And Michael's going to deep dive a little bit later on. And I hope we'll be able to engage in a dialogue and answer any of your questions about the specific policy. But before we go there, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my personal passion and how I got started in this work, and then let you know about all of the things that AFP Global is doing to make sure that we continue to keep our finger on the pulse of important policy and provide tools to AFP members and non-members that want to engage in this work. So as was mentioned in my bio, as my role on the AFP Global Board, I currently serve as Vice Chair of External Relations, which means that, that I get to hang out with Michael a lot, and that we interface with the USGR Committee, as well as the Political Action Committee. So AFP Global has a Political Action Committee. It has a standalone board. That group collects contributions and then distributes those contributions to candidates that support the policy that's most important to us as fundraisers. So this is my moment then to let you all know about our PAC and to let you know that we are always accepting contributions. And then in fact, as a donor, if you choose to decide to be a donor to the PAC, then you're invited to special briefings about policy issues and initiatives impacting our world. And we are planning to do some of those this fall. So, and possibly at AFP Icon, which is a virtual event happening in June. So if you haven't registered for AFP Icon, I hope to see you there virtually. And if you choose to be a donor to the PAC, there'll be some special programming at Icon and in the fall for those of you that join the PAC. The USGR Committee deep dives into different federal policy impacting fundraisers. We also keep our finger on the pulse of different state legislation that might be occurring in one area of our nation. And we know that sometimes once one state enacts policy, that there are other states that might follow. So we keep our finger on the pulse of state legislation impacting nonprofits, but specifically really keep our eye on the federal policy. And then again, do our best to provide updates on an ongoing manner to the legislative affairs chairs of each chapter across the nation. So AFP Global kicked off a strategic plan this year, and specifically identified within the strategic plan was our commitment to advocacy and public policy. And we see this commitment as a community building initiative, as a way for us to ensure that as many organizations and individuals as possible become members of AFP, and ultimately because the collective power of our voices, and that together we can advance favorable philanthropic policies, that when we come together and it's our entire network, one AFP, that we truly can drive positive policies that will impact philanthropy and fundraising globally. So I just want you to know that your membership dues, if you are a member, or any contributions that you make to the AFP chapter or a chapter across Texas or anywhere across the nation, that is ultimately supporting the work to strengthen our community and to ensure that we have a collective voice and input into policy impacting my job, your job, and our ability to do our jobs. So thank you again for those of you who are members. So Michael, I'm so glad you're here. As you all heard from Michael's bio, he has been with AFP Global as a paid staff member for some time, and we are very fortunate to have that institutional history, because as you know, advocacy and public policy, our work to lobby is a long game that we typically need to engage over multiple sessions if you're here in Texas, or across multiple executive leadership at the federal level, as well as at the House and Senate, that it takes many, many years of relationship building and meetings to policy. And so we just had a big initiative to connect fundraisers with their elected officials. It was virtual lobby week. It happened at the end of April. Michael, I'm hoping that you'll take the mic, so to speak, and let everybody know about the success of virtual lobby week, and then specifically about the issues and topics that we were speaking with our elected officials about. And I am now going to scroll the screen to the list of some of those specific policies that we were discussing for week. So thanks again for your support of virtual lobby week, Michael. That was really your idea. For we had a lot of participation. How did it go from your perspective?
Well, thank you, Adrienne. I really appreciate all that. Those are some very kind words, and I would say to everyone, I do love working with Adrienne. She's great. It happens to be that we both are University of Texas alums, and it might also be that we may have graduated the same year from Austin high schools who happen to be rivals, but we will not get into that. Despite all that, I very much enjoy working with Adrienne and consider her a great friend. So thank you for that. Those very nice words and a great introduction to Virtual Lobby Week. We had a great, I hope you all did hear about Virtual Lobby Week and some of the work that went on. And if your chapters didn't get a chance to meet with a member of Congress during that week, I just want to say right away that I certainly encourage you to talk to your chapter about doing so. We have all the resources to do it. It's really simple, and we like to think of a meeting with legislators as really just meeting with major donors. It's really all about meeting, getting to know them, creating a connection, and then you're making an ask. Except, for a major donor, you're asking for money, and for a member of Congress, you're asking him or her to take a position on a particular issue. And so there's really a lot of similarities for doing that. And so we have a number of chapters who actually still have yet to meet with their members of Congress, but they have them scheduled throughout. So Virtual Lobby Week was a great kind of a time to kind of center our efforts and that kind of thing, and create a lot of resources and materials for meeting with members of Congress. But I think we're certainly encouraging chapters to meet with members of Congress throughout the year. And certainly it's a great time. There's a lot of resources out there, a lot of good fact sheets, and it's about some of the issues that I'm going to be talking about here. So we probably had, I'd say, well over at least 55 meetings with members of Congress across the country. And I'm still learning more. That sometimes chapters are popping out of the woodwork and telling me, hey, we met with this person and I didn't even know about it. And that's great. So it's one of one of our strengths is our grassroots. And if we have an incredible issue in philanthropy that you're not going to hear a lot of members of Congress say they're against philanthropy. On the other hand, how far that goes in terms of what they actually will do to support philanthropy is another thing. And I think they are oftentimes on issues, they are kind of supportive of philanthropy. They don't really know exactly what fundraisers do. They don't necessarily understand the impact of fundraising. And so that's where we have to come in, and particularly all of you with our grassroots, talking very specifically about what your organization does and the impact of certain provisions in Congress that might affect your fundraising, and more importantly, how that would affect the provision of services to the constituents and the people that you serve. So our strength is that grassroots, because members of Congress are looking for stories. And I think, again, in addition to being natural born lobbyists, because that's what you do basically with donors, you're also, I think, very good storytellers. And that's what members of Congress are looking for. And I have a dry throat all morning, so excuse me. But, as we often say, like large stats, you see these stats about large numbers all the time. And sometimes they become a little meaningless because they don't necessarily have a basis in sort of a one-on-one contact, one-on-one story. So we can talk about overall giving being $450 billion a year, and that's a staggering number. But after a while, what does that really mean? How does that affect people? What does that do for somebody? And really, members of Congress are looking for the stories of your organization, of the person that you helped, however you did, whether it was social services or the arts or the environment or a community, whatever it is that individual story. So I think all of you have a lot more influence and power than I think maybe you might not ordinarily think, particularly in a realm, government relations, that I think sometimes people can be a little intimidated by. We don't know what it's about. It's not necessarily something that we necessarily do in our jobs all the time, but it's actually something that fundraisers are really well equipped for and well trained for. So I certainly encourage all of you to get involved and be kind of those advocates. It's not difficult, particularly with Zoom, makes it really easy. And we found that members of Congress are really looking they seem to be more, in a lot of cases, more responsive, and you often get to meet with them easier, more quickly via Zoom. So this online stuff has been really, if there's one part of it, it's certainly been positive, I think, in terms of getting more people to be able to reach out to members of Congress and their staffs. So I'd certainly encourage you to that. And Lobby Week, again, was I think, a great success for our first time. We're certainly going to encourage, we want to do this every year and encourage more participation every year. And certainly there's no reason, again, I'll make one final call to have meetings throughout the year. Whether it's in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months. There's some really interesting and very important issues that germane to fundraising and the charitable sector that I'm going to cover here, that we can really have an impact on fundraising, an impact on our organizations, and an impact on the people we serve. And that's the most critical. I do want to get into the issues, but Adrienne, I feel like you've got something to say. And
I do, and only because I wanted to, I don't want to distract you too much, but I'm going to keep and I keep connecting with people. And in fact, right now, what I wanted to make sure that I included, since I stopped sharing the presentation so we could all see one another's face, is here's the list of items: the universal charitable deduction, the charitable IRA rollover, and then, forgive that typo, that should be the next bullet, it's the postage rate increases in postal reform. So as Michael is talking about these issues, I'm also going to be putting links in the chat, because Michael and his team created deep dive informational sheets for all of us that participated in Virtual Lobby Week, so that in addition to hearing Michael talk about the latest and greatest about this policy, there are also some informational sheets that you all can refer to. And the reason I'm putting those links in the chat, I don't know about y'all, but minutes before this presentation, I completed an executive committee meeting for Colorado River Alliance, where we looked at our first draft of our fiscal year 22 budget, which kicks off July 1. And as is often the case, the board was asking me to predict the future and to understand what philanthropy is going to look like over the next year as we come out of this pandemic. And I'm pretty good at predicting the future most days, but what I often like to do is refer them to these items of policy that we are looking at and watching at the AFP level, because those will ultimately impact aspects of our job as fundraisers. So I present to you these links as Michael is describing the session, the policy so that you have that resource when your board asks you to predict the future of fundraising. So thank you, Michael. I'm going to go find the universal charitable deduction one pager that y'all built as you let people know all about universal charitable deduction, which has been a huge win for us. I mean, I know you and I have been talking about this at the USGR committees for a decade at least.
Yep.
It was included in the Recovery Act was a big deal for us.
No, absolutely. No, thank you, Adrienne. I really appreciate you doing that while I'm talking about that. And yeah, there's as Adrienne said, there's a whole number of fact sheets, some overall issue pages, that kind of thing that people can use both in meetings and just kind of keep updated on the issues. I do want to spend just a couple minutes talking about the kind of the general tone and tenor of Congress, because it is hard to believe that so much is actually getting done this year in the state that we're in of hyper-partisanship. When we have a Senate that is literally 50-50 and has to be, if any legislation gets passed, typically would require the vote of the vice president as the president of the Senate. It is, and yet there's always a bit of excitement when a new president comes in, regardless of party, and there's this energy of it's time to look at priorities and see what can move along. And so we're actually seeing, scarily enough, weirdly enough, actually legislation moving forward. And so that's been really good for us. And I should say too, because I'm always sensitive to this, that we are in fact, AFP is in fact nonpartisan, that we obviously work with all parties, but we do not favor any particular party. We are interested only in issues related to charitable giving and fundraising and nonprofit issues and those sorts of things. But we do work on a bipartisan basis, and it's very important for us to, as much as we can, try to get support from both parties, and obviously get as many members of Congress to support these positions as well. So certainly I may be talking about particular parties or particular people and that sort of thing, just in terms factually of what's going on in terms of support and opposition. But to be clear, we are nonpartisan in our approach, and obviously working with different parties and different views. There's just sort of some of the things that we have to do every day. A little like probably you do with major donors, and never really quite, getting to know them, and you may be working with people who in a lot of ways you might not have a lot of common with, but you do have the cause around your particular organization and its mission. And so I think that's really important for us to remember as we think about politics too. We may not agree with our particular members of Congress on a lot of things, but in our role as AFP members and as fundraisers, there are some things that members of Congress should help with, and we should definitely focus on that aspect as we try to work with them, create relationships, that sort of thing. So most of the things that I'm going to be talking about here, I'm going to be talking about individual legislation, because there is some individual legislation related to the universal charitable deduction, the IRA legacy, the IRA rollover bill, and those sorts of things. But you're not going to see these bills move necessarily by themselves. They're going to be part of a larger tax bill, a larger retirement bill. That's particularly because at this point, because of some very arcane congressional rules about how bills can move through the House and Senate. And it's also just the way tax bills work a lot of the way. You just don't see very small tax revisions they don't go to the floor for Congress and people vote on them. They're part of this huge bill all the time. But particularly with the Senate at 50-50, and there are ways that both the party in power, in this case Democrats, can move particularly large bills, whether it's budget reconciliation, which doesn't necessarily trigger a filibuster opportunity, all sorts of things like that. So that's why typically the legislation I'm going to talk about, I'm going to mention some specific bill numbers, and those are bill numbers that we refer to in our lobbying efforts. But ultimately, it's not going to be that bill number that probably passes. It's going to get inserted into a larger bill. So I think that's important for us to realize too, that the bills the bills we're talking about are markers for us right now. And ultimately, we hope to see them in a final bill. And there's a good evidence of that in one of the issues I'll be talking about. So with that environment kind of set out for us, we have seen a lot of activity and some really positive stuff. I want to start with universal charitable deduction, because as Adrienne alluded to, that has been something that, as we've seen before, it is a bill that we've yet to make permanent, but it keeps getting extended as tax provisions do. Excuse me. And so it'll get extended till the end of a year, or for a year and a couple of years. I think the current version is in until, I want to say 20, it'll be into 21, I believe, if I remember that correctly. But we've been working on that for a number of years to get it extended, and really our goal is to make it permanent. The universal charitable deduction is basically a non-itemizer deduction, although we are using now universal charitable deduction for kind of the name, but it basically allows anyone, whether you itemize your taxes or not, to take a charitable deduction. Currently, the deduction is pretty small, $300 for an individual and $600 for a couple filing jointly. The legislation that we are working on, the major bill that we're talking about, would actually change that dramatically. And that's, I'll go into that in a little bit. The bill is called the Universal Charitable Deduction, Universal Giving Pandemic Response and Recovery Act, the Universal Giving Pandemic Response and Recovery Act, or as the acronym goes, UGPRA, which is probably the worst acronym we could have hoped for. Nevertheless, we have UGPRA. And what this bill would do is, well, as I don't even have to give the presentation. Adrienne's just going to have it all there in the chat. That's awesome. It would increase the cap, the amount that people could give, up to $4,000 for individuals and $8,000 for joint filers. And that is, as you'll see, a really big increase in the cap level. And I don't think that we are necessarily, in the end, we expect to see 4,800 cap, but it is a place to start and see what members of Congress might be willing to do. I think the most, and honestly, the biggest thing for us in this bill, and this is really important, is that it does allow, it used to be just cash gifts. Now it's allowing gifts to donor advised funds. That's the kind of little expansions we're trying to see. We're trying to get it moved to 2022, as you see. And again, obviously the cap being larger as well. We've got definitely some evidence that this bill works. So for example, from our fundraising effectiveness project, which we work with data software providers to get actual data from contributions to a variety of different charities. Last year, the number of gifts of $300, that was the amount of the deduction you could take, $300 increased by 28% on the last day of the year 2020 compared to 2019. And so that, to me, being actually $300 and that amount of clearly shows that people are paying attention. As you all know, people don't give because of incentives, but when they decide to give, an incentive often increases the amount that they're willing to give, or they focus on a number like $300 once they've decided to make that gift. So I think we can clearly show that these incentives are working. We saw throughout the year, gifts of $250 or less increased, I think, overall by 15% compared to 2019. So there is a lot of evidence that shows that this bill works. I'd say the only opposition, the only concerns that people tend to have is that it can be costly as obviously as that cap increases. If we're looking at budget, and there are some concerns about, well, if it's a non-itemizer bill, you don't have to show receipts. So how do people prove that they've given that much, right? So that is a concern that the IRS occasionally has with this bill, particularly as that number gets higher. So I don't know if we will ever see a 4,000, 8,000 universal charitable deduction necessarily. I held out hope for that, but certainly something in the 500 to 1,000 range might be something that we might begin to see through a number of years. And again, this is something that we need to continue to work on. As Adrienne noted, it used to be very small. It would come every now and then. Now we've got members of Congress thinking about it. Ultimately, we want to make that permanent and be able to give a variety of gifts in different ways. So encourage we're also going to have letter writing campaigns throughout the year, particularly as this bill gets closer, as we think it might get closer to being included in a larger tax bill. So I'd certainly encourage you to become familiar with this bill, and certainly we've always got materials on our websites for writing letters. And so there's a lot of things. We've got a sample letter on there, I believe. Feel free to, and you can always feel free to contact us with that. It doesn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes to include a couple sentences about how it might affect your organization. So that's universal charitable deduction. We've got, as you can see, we've got a very strong bipartisan group of senators who are doing that. And there's also some good bipartisanship in the House as well. So it tends to be generally a very popular bill. We just have to kind of make sure that we get this, see what kind of version we can get into a final tax bill or a retirement package. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. So,
Well, and I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in there.
Yeah, no, I was going to pause. Yeah, absolutely.
I will encourage our attendees, if they have any questions about UGPRA, which who doesn't want to say UGPRA, the Universal Giving Pandemic Response and Recovery. Feel free to chat questions at Michael and I. Much of what I'm putting in the chat is available to you all on the AFP Global website. If you haven't familiarized yourself with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, the FEP, And the reports that are available for free, I would highly recommend spending a little time there. You know, it's for just you register and you're able to download the quarterly reports. Again, they can be really helpful when your board or fundraising committee wants to talk about philanthropy and what are the trends in philanthropy coming out of the pandemic. Additionally, this last link I put in the chat, which links you to the virtual lobby week and the letter writing opportunity. Scroll down that page, you will see links to each of the one-pagers for the issues that Michael is now discussing. So that is where this lengthy information that I put in the chat, that comes directly from the one-pager that is a really easily found Word doc. And we have one for each of the issue items that Michael's going to talk about. So let's see, we covered universal charitable deduction. It doesn't look like anybody's chatting any questions right now. So what's next? Are you going to talk IRA?
I will talk IRA, and I got to tell you, I'm going to hire you for most of my presentations now, Adrienne. I really think this is going to be something. I think fundraising might be your first passion, but I think you've got time to pivot a little bit. I think this is going to be good. I think this is
woman of many talents.
Exactly right. This is awesome. This is what. Thank you for doing this, because I'd be typing up a storm and trying to talk. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yes, the IRA Legacy Act. This is great proof of exactly what can happen when you continue to lobby a bill over and over. We did finally, as with universal charitable deduction, this is something we've been working on even longer than the universal charitable deduction, and we finally got the IRA Legacy Act permanent in 2006, I want to say, or maybe that's when we started on it. It's been a while. And we've now made it permanent. And so what the IRA rollover currently right now stands at a donor age 70 and a half can transfer money from an IRA retirement fund directly to a charitable organization, which is fine and good. And we've certainly gotten a number of stories about how this has helped. There are a number of seniors with a lot of money in their retirement accounts, and having talked with their financial advisor, this is something that they can do. And it can be really powerful from a lot of the stories that we've gotten from people. The Legacy IRA Act wants to kind of enhance that and expand the provisions, because right now it only applies to cash gifts. And so there are currently a couple different versions happening right now in the House and Senate. They're not identical. The Senate version is the one that we're liking right now, because obviously it has a lot more expansion. So it would move the eligible date for a donor from 70 and a half to 65. And it would increase the amount that you could give to 400,000 overall, and would most importantly, from talking with a lot of our members, include a charitable gift annuity option, a charitable remainder trust, a unit trust. So some planned giving options that you could give through your IRA, and that's really critical. Certainly, I think that could lead to a large number of gifts when we look at kind of the average annuity gift and that sort of thing. So we're really pleased with that version. On the other hand, the House version is a bit more limited, but the House version has actually kind of already taken a step forward. So we're kind of balancing different ends here. The House version, I think, keeps the age at 75, but does allow charitable gift annuities, and the increase doesn't go as high. I'd have to take a look, actually, because it just came out of committee. It may be tied to inflation, about 130,000, I believe, at this point. There have been a couple of different draft versions that the committee has been working with. So this came out of the House Ways and Means Committee. And as I was talking about, these bills get attached to larger legislation. So the House version of the Legacy IRA has been attached to a retirement package called Securing Our Future. I'm going to look for the right name, because this inevitably leaves me. I believe it's Securing Our Strong Future Act, because it's the second one that they tried to introduce it last year. It's a large retirement bill that has some really great bipartisan support, and it's sailed to the Ways and Means Committee again with the slightly limited version. But everything that we're hearing is that this retirement package is going to pass the House. It will likely be very favorably seen in the Senate. We think there's a really strong chance then of some version of the IRA Legacy Act ultimately getting, fingers crossed, kind of approved into law at some point this year, if what we're hearing from the Hill sounds right. So this is been a really, this really, we think we could unlock a lot of giving, but it's going to require, I think, again, we're going to come back to members probably at important times throughout the year, probably just before the vote in the House. Then we kind of begin to see what the Senate landscape looks like. Kind of, I think on this, they're kind of taking their lead from the House. This is the House Ways and Means Chair is one of his big kind of pet projects. It's one of his priorities for a long time to see this big retirement bill come through. So we're really excited about this and this prospect of including, and it's possible, you know, this is one of those things, maybe the universal charitable deduction gets on this. It doesn't have quite the retirement connection, obviously, that the IRA rollover has. But that's how these kind of, as you've probably heard the term, kind of Christmas trees, and things getting added to these large tax bills. It is quite possible that we might see additional provisions added on to the retirement package. So we'll have to see how that goes. But we're excited about that prospect, and certainly the universal giving, the universal charitable deduction would tend to bring in more money overall. But certainly the IRA Legacy Act looks at larger gifts. And that's one of the things that we like about our two-pronged priorities here, is that we're focusing on gifts, you know, smaller gifts with the universal charitable deduction, and then kind of larger, you know, planned major gifts kind of through the IRA Legacy. So we're kind of making sure that all spectrums of donors have some sort of incentive to give. And I think that's really important for us comprehensively as we think about wanting to encourage all Americans to give throughout the year. So there are those two issues. And again, I certainly encourage you to write letters, as Adrienne probably has the link. There is a letter, sample letter for the IRA Legacy Act as well. So certainly encourage you to get involved in there. And that's going to be, those are two sort of major giving priorities for this year. There's a third priority. I don't know if I don't see any questions particularly on this bill. So I'm just going to charge ahead. There's a third priority that we had for Virtual Lobby Week, our postage rates. And this is a little different kind of an issue. It's not an issue that's directly related to something that Congress is doing. This is more of a administrative regulatory issue, but still we need to get Congress involved in it. This is some arcane stuff too, even for a lobbyist. But the Postal Service has a way of determining how much your postage rates go up. Believe it or not, it's not just a dart that they throw at a wall, although sometimes it seems like that. And so they've gone through a 10-year process of reforming a lot of their systems and how they go about this. And so for the last several years, nonprofits have been seeing increases in their postage rates of about the rate of inflation. We're 1% to 2%, somewhere around there, but not typically high. Now they've got this reform process done and they have these new systems in place. We just saw like a 1.5% increase in January for most nonprofits rates. And now they want to add nonprofit rates of about 6% to 8%. And the mechanism they have now, and it's this whole new system they have, is that you could see 6% to 8% increases every year for a few years, particularly because we know that you may have heard that the Postal Service is under some financial stressors, shall we say, at this point, and is looking to figure out where it has its money. Although we keep hearing different things about it's got money here, it's got funds there. So it's become a bit of a political football as well. But we could be dealing with very large postage rates increase. The bottom line is for not only this year, but for a number of years, and particularly coming out of the pandemic, particularly when we've seen, frankly, as I'm sure some of you all can attest to, major delays in postage delivery, which is kind of important near the end of the year. I mean, it's always important, but certainly around the end of the year. I mean, we were hearing stories of charities finally getting of gifts through the mail in March and April of this year. So it's an ongoing issue, and certainly that hurts thank you letters, that hurts relationships, all sorts of things. So we're very concerned about this, obviously, and I think even for those of you who don't necessarily have a hugely robust major gifts program, it can be a serious thing when you start thinking about those 6% to 8% increases year upon year. And as we know, even though we keep talking about online giving and technology and all that sort of stuff, online gifts are barely 10% at this point. So there's at least 50% of all gifts come through direct mail still. And so these increases could have some serious impact on a lot of fundraising ability, and certainly lessens what we can necessarily provide sometimes in services and that sort of thing. The problem is this isn't something that Congress can just pass a bill and say, don't do this, because that's not the authority that Congress has. It's the Postal Service's authority. The Congress can vote on the Board of Governors, and that's also become a political issue now. Who gets to be on the Board of Governors, who gets to run the Postal Service? That's been a huge thing that Congress certainly is wading into. But this issue, not a lot of them know about. In fact, we've seen that from our visits. A lot of them have been completely surprised about this issue. and not sure what they can do. And so what we have been asking members of Congress to do is simply send a letter to the U.S. Postal Service. Louis DeJoy is currently the Postmaster General, and asking him to, what we're asking for is just to delay the increase at this point until 2022. We think that's fair, given that many, we're still dealing with the pandemic, we're still dealing with the impact of delays in postal service and delivery. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense having already been hit with the increase at the beginning of the year. So we've been pleasantly surprised. I think there have been a number of several offices who have been interested in acting on our part with this, because it's not a direct one. It's not sort of like, say, support this bill or do this. We're asking them to write a letter to somebody else, which is not always the most, it's not the most common ask when you're in a meeting with a member of Congress. But it's really important. And it's certainly, we have letters to write to members of Congress about this. And chapter's been asked by a couple of members of Congress if we could write a letter for them. And that's great. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're in with a member of Congress, or they really need your help when they're asking you to write a letter on their behalf. And so I think this is an issue that we have some potential with, actually. And it's a great way to follow up with a member and see, like, hey, here's that letter, or are you interested in writing this letter, that sort of thing. Because as you all know, that's part of developing a relationship is the follow up and creating connections and doing things and that sort of thing. So again, I don't want to, how they came up with those rates, and there are different, I said 6 to 8.5%. There are some versions of nonprofit rail are 6, others are 8.5. There's a whole different kind of categories and that sort of thing, but it could have a significant increase on nonprofit postage rates. And so that's kind of the crux of our letters, without getting a whole lot into the, lost in the details. Our ask is very clean, very simple: delay this until 2022. We will see what kind of relief that Congress might be able to get through. One of the issues that the Senate is looking at is postage reform this year, further postage reform. We're always reforming. So we may see some completely different results in a year or two. And that's, I think, frankly, long-term, that's another reason why we'd like to delay this until 2022. I do get the question. We certainly believe in the Postal Service, and I don't think that we are not insensitive to the concerns of the Postal Service, because obviously we need a good Postal Service to be working. We just don't think that this particular increase right now makes a heck of a lot of sense, given what charities are dealing with in terms of increased demand, and again, the lowered revenue through the pandemic, delayed postal services, and that sort of thing. So those are sort of, again, got all those resources as Adrienne put up there. And certainly that's an important thing that will be coming. I suspect this is one of those nebulous things too, because they keep moving back when their increase might happen. It was supposed to happen in May. It's now July. I'd like to believe that's because of some of the pressure that we're putting on. We're working on this. There are several groups in DC that are particularly focused on mailing issues that I think they're hearing from, and we are part of those coalitions to help out. So I hope that they're hearing us a little bit as they move this back. Could also be some of the politics involved with the Board of Governors, but we will be back to this issue at some point as well, and certainly encourage you to write your letters at the appropriate time when it will make the most impact. So I feel like I've rambled a bit. I know it's been lovely, but I feel like maybe I've rambled a bit. So I want to stop here and just see if there are any questions, and just, Adrienne, if you've got any comments sort of about these kind of 3 priorities and sort of thing.
Well, I have just recovered from hitting the floor and learning that some nonprofits are only just as of March and April receiving contributions that were sent in the mail due to the delays. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I would love to, if any of our attendees are open to chatting, let me know if you've seen any impact associated with some of the delays in postal service. But again, I just appreciate you, Michael, for talking through all of these different policy points, and specifically for sharing with everyone and reminding everyone that as we look at policy that could impact fundraising and philanthropy, we do consider all levels of donors. We consider those might be, giving a $250 or $300 donation, and that's the total of their giving for the year, as well as those, who may be at a very different point in their life and giving a considerable amount. So I appreciated that point. I mean, that is one of the ways in which IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and that framework is applied to everything in the strategic plan for AFP.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate that. I also, I think we wanted to, of course, make time for questions.
Mhm.
Catherine, I was hoping that Michael could just spend one more minute letting everybody know about some of our strategic partnerships. So
Absolutely.
we work closely with a couple of other nonprofits that also employ full-time lobbyists. And it's some of those individuals who join us for legislative updates during our PAC meetings. So Michael, can you remind me some of our key partners in this world?
Absolutely. So we helped form one of the key coalitions that we work in is we helped form the Charitable Giving Coalition, which really includes it's probably about 175, 200 major nonprofit fundraising groups across the country. This is a group that we created. Wow, maybe even in the early part of the decade, like at least 10, 15 years ago now, to when there were some attacks, some legislation that would have limited the charitable deduction in different ways. And so we created this coalition to ensure that the deduction wouldn't have been affected. And now we've in fact kind of moved the coalition's work to the universal charitable deduction. That's sort of the key coalition that we work with through the charitable deduction. So we certainly work with groups like CASE, the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. A number of other groups, most of the major United Ways, Red Crosses, Heart Association, I mean, all those sorts of things tend to are part of the coalition that we're typically working on. So that's been a really big part of our program is having those meetings, and we can get a lot of information out to people. We can get a lot of letters going, that sort of thing. So that's been really powerful. There's kind of a smaller coalition for the IRA rollover. I'd say Heart Association and us have been really pushing that one. Several other groups as well. The Planned Giving has been active, obviously, in that particular area now with some of this expansion of the Legacy Act. So that's another group that we work with there. And then, the Alliance of Nonprofit Mailers, as you might expect, with a group with a name like the Alliance of Nonprofit Mailers, been very helpful, certainly with the postage rate increases. And there are several other groups that we work with, touch base with. The nonprofit alliance we've worked with both on mailing increases as well as the Supreme. I didn't even mention the Supreme Court case on donor privacy in the Form 990. So lots of groups that we work with that have been really very helpful for pushing these issues as well. So
that is great to know. I think maybe in just these last few minutes, Michael and Adrienne, you guys are doing incredible work on behalf of everything that we do in Texas and then across the country. Aside from sort of injecting ourselves in terms of writing letters and making sure that we have a level of awareness of what's going on, what other sort of practical things can we do as fundraisers? Some of us are in small shops, not only to help advance the AFP agenda, which is really critical to our success moving forward, but maybe what are some other local things and some practical advice that you could give us that we can make an impact?
Well, I'll jump in here, Michael, while you're contemplating, because I work for a small shop, very small nonprofit here in Austin. And so the first thing I think is so important is that if you are here attending, it's because you understand not only the importance of nonprofits engaging in advocacy and public policy, but our ethical and lawful right to do so. So one of the things I think that is incumbent upon all of us is to continue to make sure that our boards and CEOs are aware that nonprofits can effectively and ethically engage in this work. And that is one of, I think, the best things and the most practical things that you as an individual can do is you can, at your next AFP meeting, when we're all meeting in person again, talk to other people, talk to other fundraisers, and make sure they know and that they're comfortable telling their boards and their CEOs that we have a place at advocacy and public policy. We have a place at the table. It is ethical and important for us to do the work. So that's one practical step is
Right.
make sure everybody's on this bus with us and that they understand our role in that. And then secondly, that's why I've been putting some of the links in the chat is because I think the other practical thing you can do is leverage the tools that are available. That fundraising effectiveness project, the reports are so graphically presented, they're really easy to digest. And then each of the one-pagers about this policy, universal charitable deduction, I mean, honestly, because I don't have the opportunity to work with planned gifts very often, the IRA rollover conversation, it's is a little, it's outside the depth of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. So use those one-pagers, print them out, make them available either at your next development committee meeting or just in your next conversation with your CEO. Those are some really easy to use one-pagers that help crystallize these complex policy issues that we're looking at. Michael, did you have suggestions for?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say if you have a chance, I mean, I think it's always great if you have a board or in a series of key volunteers and supporters to maybe get our message out to some of those people. I think that would be awesome. Take our sample letter. We have no pride of ownership of that, and if it maybe just take a few minutes just to kind of personalize that or change it kind of from the perspective of your organization or a donor writing it, be a board member or anything like that. But certainly, I think your board is your key champions, and I think they can probably play a key role in getting some letters and messages out about these kinds of giving incentives that would help your organization. So I think including that and kind of widening the net of what we can do. I think is really important that way. A lot of this is, one of the things that I found with the lobby week, which has been, I think, really gratifying, is that a lot of chapters have kind of come out and said, that was really easy. And
right.
They're kind of excited about it, but they're like, oh, okay. Like I'm literally it's like, he has this member of Congress, he or she has an office. I contact them. I find the right person to talk to, whoever handles tax charity issues. I set up a meeting on Zoom. I get 3 or 4 people from the chapter. We meet, Like it is literally just like setting up a meeting with a major donor. I keep going back to that because I think it's really, but you all do this all the time.
It's the same skill set. Right.
And you're really good at it. That's the thing. You're really good at it. Like, I think we have so much potential compared to other associations and other organizations, because we literally have 26,000 people who basically lobby and advocate all the time. They just don't do it in the government relations setting. And I think once you kind of that veil of like, oh my gosh, it's public policy, and we don't have to be experts. They're not looking for experts. They're looking for stories. They're looking for some very general stuff in our fact sheets. Tell me a story about how it affects somebody or a particular group in your community. Boom. I mean, that's really it. They're not looking, like, they come to me and others, and people frankly far smarter than me, to talk about provision A2.456, right? That's not your job as grassroots lobbyists. So I think that's really important. And so let's get that information out there. It's really simple. Write a letter, come up with a meeting. Obviously, it does take time away from fundraising. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But I think the dividends that it could create, the ROI that it could create, is high enough that it's definitely worth it to take a little time once a month, whatever you can do, definitely.
Absolutely. So. Well, there's also, to me, the only shift in mindset really is that they work for us, right? We elect them into office. And
right.
So it's not like our donors. It's a little bit of a mindset, which almost makes it a little bit easier, I think.
You're right. There's kind of a pre-made connection, or at least kind of a pre-made responsibility in terms of, I guess we need to listen to you all. Right. So that's you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That makes it a little easier.
That's incredibly helpful. I think it's good for us to know as fundraisers what's coming down the pipeline, what we need to be wary of or aware of, or actively supporting or potentially writing letters against. So we have about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to add? I'm so grateful for your time today. I know everybody's incredibly busy right now.
Absolutely. I feel good. I feel like we covered the points, Adrienne.
Excellent.
I too, I'll just say again, Catherine, thank you so much for the opportunity to share these topics, of which I am incredibly passionate, with people. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your leadership in making this happen. And thank you again to Kristen as the AFP Austin board chair. And I think Holly is here as well, incoming chair. So we really appreciate Austin's continued commitment to advocacy and public policy. And and I'm so excited. I hope many of you are going to go right into the AFP member luncheon, because Councilwoman Fuentes is going to be there, which I love that woman. This is just Adrienne speaking, not in my professional role or in any other capacity, but I'm so excited y'all have the benefit of getting to engage with Councilwoman Fuentes as part of the next presentation. And had a lot of coffee, a lot of green tea. So I just invite everyone one more time as we're ending the session to take a moment to just take a deep breath, AFP has been really, really important to me because of the relationships. And so thank you all so much. For One AFP, I really appreciate your work. Thank you, Catherine, for letting me be part of today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thanks to all the chapters that participated in this event and helped, to Philanthropy Southwest and One Star Foundation and United Ways of Texas, who are our partners on this first ever effort. I hope we can get in together in person next time, but I do appreciate sort of the inclusivity of this virtual platform. It allowed for a lot of dialogue and inclusion. So thank you all so much. I'm overwhelmed with gratitude at all this good stuff that happened the last 2 days. And I hope many of you will join us for the luncheon next, but that forms our Legislative Action Day series for 2021. So thank you all so much. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Adrienne.
You bet. Take care.
Take care.